I never thought my life would get turned upside down in such a shocking way. My name is Jake, and I was married to the love of my life, Sarah, for almost 8 years. We had what I thought was a solid marriage. Sure, there were the usual ups and downs, but we always managed to talk things through. At least, that's what I believed until I began noticing something was off. It started subtly. Sarah, once so attentive and eager to spend evenings cooking together, began to pull away. She got busier with her job at the marketing firm, often coming home late, claiming meetings ran long. I was supportive, thinking it was just the seasons of work stress. But tension grew, and with it, a creeping suspicion. I noticed little things. Her phone was always locked, and she'd become defensive if I asked to see her screen. When I brought up the possibility of a weekend getaway, she brushed it off, saying she had things to do. The warmth we used to share felt increasingly distant. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the grind of adult life. But as weeks turned into months, the signs became harder to dismiss. One night while Sarah was out, I was cleaning up the living room when I stumbled upon a receipt in her jacket pocket. It was for an expensive dinner at a new restaurant in town, a place I knew she hadn't mentioned. My heart raced. I thought she had plans with some coworkers. When I confronted her about it the next day, she laughed it off, saying it was a client dinner that got out of hand. It was the first crack in the facade, but I wanted to believe her. A few days later, though, I hit the jackpot. Her phone buzzed while she was in the shower, and my curiosity got the best of me. I glanced at the screen and saw messages from someone named Chef Max. The exchanges were flirty, suggestive, and it hit me like a freight train. I felt my heart drop into my stomach as I read through a few more. My hands shook, and the reality of what I was uncovering turned my blood cold. That was the moment everything changed. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was undeniable. Later that evening, when Sarah came home, I knew I had to confront her. My heart pounded as I laid it all out, showing her the texts. Instead of the remorse I expected, she became defensive, angry even. "You don't understand, it's not what it looks like," she shouted, her tone cutting through the air like glass. I felt a mix of betrayal and confusion. "Then what is it, Sarah? Because from where I'm standing it looks pretty clear." She floundered for excuses, claiming it was just harmless flirting, that she was bored, and that I hadn't been paying enough attention. It felt like she was throwing darts at a board, hoping something would stick. As I stood there, my heart broke a little more with each word she spat out. It was as if I was witnessing a bizarre performance, one where I was the stooge in a cruel joke. I had always imagined that when faced with infidelity, the conversation would be filled with tears and apologies, not defiance and lies. That night after our fight, I sat alone, replaying the last few months in my mind. I was angry, devastated, and confused all at once. My trust had been shattered, and I felt like a fool. I never imagined this could happen to us. The life we built together felt like ashes, and I was left trying to sift through the debris to find something worth saving. As I wrestled with my thoughts, something deep within me sparked a fire. I didn't want to just accept this betrayal. I wanted to do something, anything, that would not only make her understand the weight of her actions but also reclaim my own sense of self. I started thinking about revenge, about how I could turn the tables on the one person who had hurt me most. The idea of ruining the career of the man who had taken my wife away became all-consuming. I knew I had to change things. I had to become someone she never expected. If she could cheat with a celebrity chef, then I could become the voice that would bring him down. It was time to turn my pain into a plan. As the days passed, I stewed in my anger, my mind racing with ideas. I needed to gather information, not just about Sarah's affair with Chef Max, but also about the culinary world he inhabited. I'd never been particularly interested in food beyond the basic necessity of eating, but this new mission ignited a burning curiosity in me. I started to read food blogs, follow culinary critics, and watch cooking shows. I became a recluse, poring over reviews and culinary trends, determined to understand the landscape of the food industry. One night, while deep diving into articles about food criticism, I stumbled upon a few local food blogs. It was clear that the competition was fierce, and those who wielded the power of a well-timed review could make or break a restaurant. I began to formulate my plan. If I could become a credible food critic, I could ensure that Chef Max's star would fall faster than it had risen. I decided to start my own food blog using a pseudonym. The Discerning Eater, I called it. I would critique his restaurant. His celebrity status wouldn't protect him from my words. I wanted to be sharp, insightful, and honest. As I crafted my first post, I felt a sense of empowerment that had been absent since the betrayal. I knew I needed to be strategic. I'd have to gain some credibility before going after Chef Max directly. To build my reputation, I visited numerous restaurants across the city, documenting my experiences, focusing on service, ambience, and of course, the food. My reviews were brutally honest yet fair. I wanted to establish myself as a legitimate voice in the culinary community. Every meal I reviewed felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity. Sarah, oblivious to my plans, continued to be consumed by her own world. She would excitedly share how much she admired Chef Max's work, often talking about his latest cookbook or his television appearances. Each mention felt like a dagger, but I kept my composure, letting her think I was indifferent. Little did she know, I was preparing to unveil a side of the culinary world she had never seen. As my blog started to gain traction, I received a few messages from fellow food enthusiasts and critics. Encouraging feedback fueled my ambition. With each post, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My writing began to attract attention, and before long, I was invited to a local food event where Chef Max was scheduled to appear. The moment was ripe for a confrontation. The night of the event, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. I was nervous, but I also felt a surge of adrenaline. I donned my best suit, wanting to look the part of a serious food critic. As I entered the venue, a chic downtown restaurant, the energy buzzed with excitement. I scanned the room, spotting Chef Max mingling with fans and foodies alike, his charisma magnetic. He was everything Sarah had described, a charming celebrity chef full of life and energy. I mingled, pretending to be part of the crowd, trying to learn as much as I could about the man who had crossed the line with my wife. I took mental notes of his interactions, observing how effortlessly he captivated those around him. The anger inside me simmered, but I forced myself to remain calm. I needed to collect evidence, words, actions, anything I could use to expose him. As the night progressed, I overheard a small group discussing Chef Max's upcoming restaurant launch. They couldn't stop gushing about his culinary genius. I felt my stomach churn as I watched him bask in the attention, unbothered by the chaos he had caused in my life. I couldn't just stand back and let it happen. Then, in a moment of unforeseen opportunity, I found myself standing next to him at the bar. I gathered my courage and approached, introducing myself as a food critic. He flashed a charming smile, and I felt a surge of disgust at how easily he engaged with me. I asked him about his upcoming projects, and he launched into an enthusiastic pitch about his new restaurant concept. It was everything I needed to know. His ego was palpable, and beneath his charming exterior, I sensed a man who was more than willing to play the game of public perception. After our brief chat, I walked away, feeling a mix of triumph and revulsion. I had gotten close enough to gather intel, but now I needed to take my analysis a step further. I decided it was time to craft my first critical review of his work, setting the stage for my revenge. In the following days, I meticulously planned my assault. I reviewed the nuances of his menu, the buzz around his restaurants, and the public's perception of him. I aimed to dissect every aspect of his culinary empire, but I needed one last piece of the puzzle: real experiences from the staff and patrons at his restaurants. I began to dig deeper. I reached out to former employees and frequent diners, gathering their stories. Some spoke of long hours, poor treatment, and the pressure to maintain a facade of perfection. Others were willing to share anecdotes that painted Chef Max in a less than flattering light. Piece by piece, I was constructing a narrative that would not only expose his culinary shortcomings, but also reveal the kind of man he truly was. As the pieces fell into place, I realized I was ready to unleash my plan. My fingers flew over the keyboard and I wrote my first review, weaving in the gathered tailies and my own observations. I was no longer just a heartbroken husband. I was a critic ready to take down a celebrity chef. What would Sarah think when she saw my words? Would she finally understand the weight of her betrayal? I felt a mix of excitement and dread as I prepared to launch my blog into the world. Little did she know, the tables were turning and revenge was simmering just beneath the surface. The day had finally come to publish my first review. I felt a cocktail of nervousness and anticipation bubbling within me. As I stared at the screen, my heart raced. This was it, the moment I would finally unveil the truth, not just to the world but to Sarah as well. I hit the publish button and the moment felt surreal. My review was a scathing look at Chef Max's restaurant, Culinary Haven. I dissected the menu, critiqued the service, and added the insider stories I had gathered from former staff members. I painted a picture of a kitchen filled with chaos, where the reality of working for a celebrity chef was far from glamorous. I ended it with a bold statement. Sometimes, the allure of celebrity can blind us to the truth behind the flames. In the hours that followed, my blog began to garner attention. Comments poured in, some supportive, others skeptical. But the best part was that my review caught the eye of several local food influencers, who subsequently shared it on their social media platforms. It wasn't long before the buzz surrounding it reached Chef Max and his team. I watched as the storm brewed online, and with each notification I felt a rush of vindication. I knew I had struck a chord. The culinary world was abuzz with discussions about the piece. People began to question Chef Max's credibility, and for the first time since Sarah's betrayal, I felt powerful. As I continued to monitor the growing conversation, I was surprised when a local news outlet reached out for commentary. They wanted to interview me about my review and my perspective on the culinary scene. It was a golden opportunity, and I seized it, using my pseudonym and maintaining the air of an impartial critic. During the interview, I was poised, articulate, and passionate about my newfound role as a food critic. I talked about the pressures of the culinary industry, the often overlooked employees, and the necessity of accountability in the kitchens of celebrity chefs. The reporter was impressed, and I could tell they were intrigued by my insights. After the piece aired, Sarah came home later than usual. I could tell she was agitated. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. I feigned ignorance, casually asking her about her day. She launched into a tirade about how her colleagues were buzzing about some negative review of Chef Max's restaurant. I watched her face, searching for signs of guilt as she spoke highly of him while simultaneously being visibly upset. "People can be so cruel," she said, rolling her eyes. "They don't realize how hard he works. He's just a guy trying to live his dream." I felt a smirk tug at the corner of my mouth. "Sounds like he's not doing so well then," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. She shot me a look, narrowing her eyes. "What do you mean?" "Just heard that some critic wrote a scathing review. It must be rough for him right now." At that moment, I could almost see the wheels turning in her mind. Did she connect the dots? Did she suspect I was the one behind the words that were tearing down her beloved chef? "Critics these days have no idea what they're talking about," she retorted, shaking her head. "They think they can just sit behind a keyboard and tear people apart without understanding the effort that goes into it." I could feel the tension in the room as we danced around the topic, both acutely aware of the elephant looming between us. I held my breath, waiting for her to piece it together, but she continued to rant about how unfair the criticism was. I realized that perhaps she still believed that her affair with Chef Max was insignificant, a mere fling. Over the next couple of weeks, the fallout from my review began to take shape. Local media outlets picked up the story, and Chef Max was forced to respond. His charm began to falter under the pressure of a growing backlash. He issued a statement claiming that the review was personal and unfounded, but it only fueled the fire. The culinary community began to rally against him, and my blog gained traction like wildfire. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed increasingly agitated. I watched her struggle with the backlash Chef Max was facing, and while she maintained her defense of him, I could see the cracks in her facade. The glow in her eyes when she spoke of him had dimmed, replaced by a simmering frustration. It was intoxicating to witness. One evening, after another barrage of notifications and news reports about Chef Max's restaurant suffering from canceled reservations, Sarah finally snapped. I was sitting on the couch, going over blog comments, when she stormed into the room, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. People are ruining his life over a bad review. You think you're such a hotshot, but you're just a coward hiding behind a screen." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm despite the rage bubbling beneath the surface. "Sarah, I'm not hiding, I'm using my voice. Something you've been too blind to see in your admiration of him." She threw her hands up in frustration. "You don't get it, you don't know him. He's a great chef and he makes people happy. You're ruining everything, Jake." It was the first time I'd seen her so unhinged, and it felt surreal. "You think this is about you, about him. This is about honesty, Sarah. You want to defend a man who didn't think twice about betraying someone's trust. You want to defend someone who made a choice to sleep with a married woman." Her expression shifted, a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You're being dramatic. It's not like it was serious." "Not serious? What does that even mean?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You think it's okay to belittle what we had? To think that what you did does matter because it was some fling with a celebrity chef?" In that moment, the tension between us reached a boiling point. I felt the years of hurt and betrayal surge through me. I had dedicated myself to this marriage, and yet here we were, caught in a battle over a man who had become a symbol of her infidelity. Sarah stormed out of the room, and as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was changing. The energy in our home felt different, like the calm before a storm. I had unleashed something much larger than myself. The consequences were becoming palpable, and I was ready to see this through to the end. As I prepared to write my next review, I knew it would be personal. This wasn't just about the restaurant anymore. It was about revealing the truth and tearing down the image of the man who had disrupted my life. My anger fueled me. I was on a path of revenge, and I wasn't looking back. The aftermath of my confrontation with Sarah hung heavy in the air. I was determined to turn my mounting anger into something constructive, something that would not only serve my need for revenge, but also shed light on the truth behind Chef Max's carefully constructed persona. The culinary world was buzzing, and I wanted to strike while the iron was hot. I spent the next few days deepening my research, gathering more evidence against Chef Max. I reached out to more former employees, collecting stories about his actions behind the scenes and their experiences working under him. Many were more than willing to share their accounts of long hours, emotional manipulation, and a toxic workplace culture. It painted a vivid picture of a man who, despite his celebrity status, wielded power in a way that left a trail of burned bridges. One of the most striking stories came from a sous chef who had left one of Chef Max's kitchens. She described how he would belittle his staff during service, creating an atmosphere of fear and anxiety. "He's a genius in the kitchen, no doubt," she said, "but he's also a tyrant. It's like he thinks being famous gives him the right to treat people however he pleases." That story hit home for me. It wasn't just about Chef Max's culinary skills, it was about who he really was as a person. I felt a wave of validation wash over me as I realized I wasn't just taking down a chef. I was exposing a flawed man whose actions had repercussions far beyond the kitchen. With every new interview and piece of evidence I collected, I crafted a more comprehensive review for my blog. I decided it would be a two-part series, first detailing my previous experience and critiques, then delving deeper into the behind-the-scenes chaos that unfolded when the cameras were off. I felt powerful as I wove the narrative together, each word dripping with purpose. Meanwhile, the tension at home escalated. Sarah had become increasingly agitated, packing the apartment, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. It was evident how much the fallout from my review was affecting her. She gotten into heated arguments with her friends, many of whom were now questioning her judgment and loyalty. The whispers of betrayal began to haunt her, and I relished every moment of her discomfort. The day I published the second part of my review felt monumental. I knew I was crossing a line, but it was a line worth crossing. The post featured first-hand accounts from disgruntled employees, painting Chef Max as not just a flawed chef but a deeply flawed human being. I closed the piece with a strong statement. Behind the glitz and glamour, the truth is often lost. The kitchen can be a brutal jungle, and the king of this jungle doesn't seem to care who he steps on. The backlash against Chef Max was immediate and severe. Social media exploded with criticism, and food lovers who had once idolized him began to question their loyalty. Reservations at Culinary Haven dropped drastically, and local news stations picked up the story, interviewing some of the employees who had spoken out. It felt like an avalanche. Everything I had set in motion was coming to fruition. I was riding a wave of adrenaline, but I also felt a nagging sense of emptiness. Sure, I was making waves, but was it truly worth the destruction that accompanied it? I glanced at Sarah, who had grown increasingly distant. She was no longer the enthusiastic partner I had married. She was now a stranger consumed by shame and anger. The reality of her affair was sinking in, and I couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of the unraveling. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table staring at my computer screen, she walked in and slammed the door behind her. "You're ruining everything," she shouted, her face a mask of frustration. "Do you even realize the impact you're having? People are suffering because of your vendetta." I looked up, surprised by the fire in her voice. "Suffering? Sarah, let's not pretend here. This isn't about suffering, it's about accountability. He made a choice to betray trust, our trust. He deserves every bit of backlash he gets for what he's done." Her eyes widened, and I could see the desperation in her expression. "You're becoming obsessed. This isn't just about him, it's about us. You're on this path, and I don't know where it leads anymore." "Us?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You think we can go back to normal after what you did? You think I can just forget that you chose to sleep with another man?" She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The silence hung in the air, thick with unresolved tension. I could see that she was grappling with the reality of her actions, and it dawned on me just how much she had underestimated the consequences of her choices. In that moment, something shifted within me. The anger I had been channeling toward Chef Max morphed into a realization that I needed to address my own hurt and betrayal. My pursuit of revenge had been cathartic, but also destructive. It had created a chasm between me and Sarah that felt impossible to bridge. I took a deep breath and softened my tone. "Look, I don't want to make this about us fighting all the time, but I can't pretend everything is okay. What you did hurt me deeply, and now I'm trying to make sense of it all." She looked at me, her expression shifting from anger to vulnerability. "I know I messed up, Jake. I thought it was just a fling, a way to escape the mundane. I never meant for it to turn into this. I didn't think about how it would affect you or us." Her admission caught me off guard. In that moment, I saw the cracks in her facade. She was struggling with her guilt, and while it didn't excuse her actions, it was a glimpse of the woman I had once loved. "I don't know if we can come back from this," I said, my voice steady yet filled with uncertainty. "But if we're going to try, we need to be real with each other. I can't just keep doing this out of spite. It's eating away at me." Sarah nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't want to lose you, Jake. I can't change what I did, but I want to make amends. I want to be better. I just need you to let me." In that moment of honesty, a small flicker of hope ignited within me. Perhaps there was a way forward, if we were both willing to confront the truth and the pain we had caused each other. But I knew it would take time and effort, and I wasn't quite ready to forgive her completely. As I pondered our future, I realized that my quest for revenge had obscured the possibility of healing. The culinary world may have been my battleground, but the real fight was within my own heart. I needed to find a balance between seeking justice for my pain and allowing space for healing, both for myself and for Sarah. With resolve, I made a decision. I wouldn't abandon my blog, but I would shift my focus. I would continue to write, but I would incorporate my journey of healing. I wanted to use my voice not only to critique, but also to reflect on trust, betrayal, and rebuilding relationships. I hoped that through my experience, others might find solace in their own struggles. As I turned back to my computer, I felt the weight of my journey beginning to lighten. I was no longer just a husband seeking revenge. I was a man trying to reclaim his life and navigate the complexities of love and forgiveness. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it head-on. In the days that followed my confrontation with Sarah, our relationship began to shift. It was as if the air had cleared just enough to allow us to breathe, to consider the possibility of rebuilding what had been shattered. But rebuilding would require more than just apologies and a desire to move on. It would take effort, vulnerability, and a commitment to change. I decided to take a step back from my blogs focus on revenge. Instead, I began to weave in reflections on trust and the delicate nature of relationships. I shared my own experiences, how betrayal felt, the emotional turmoil of discovering Sarah's affair, and the path toward healing. The response was overwhelming. People reached out, sharing their own stories of heartbreak and recovery, and I found solace in knowing that I wasn't alone in my struggles. Meanwhile, Chef Max's career continued to falter. My reviews had taken on a life of their own, drawing scrutiny from food critics and the general public alike. His once bustling restaurant was now a shell of its former self, and the impact of my words weighed heavily on me. I started to feel a sense of remorse, especially knowing that my pursuit of revenge had real consequences for many innocent employees who relied on that job for their livelihood. Just days after my last review went viral, I received a call from a local news station wanting to interview me again, this time focusing on my journey since the initial backlash. It felt surreal to be on the other end of the spotlight, reflecting on my actions and the way they had spiraled out of control. I agreed, hoping to share the lessons I had learned about accountability, not just for others but for myself. When the day of the interview arrived, I dressed carefully, wanting to present myself as someone thoughtful and introspective. As I sat across from the host, the conversation flowed naturally. I spoke about my journey, the pain of betrayal, and how it had ignited a fire in me to confront not just Chef Max, but also my own issues in my relationship with Sarah. I emphasized the importance of open communication and honesty, lessons I had learned through my heartache. Revenge feels good in the moment, but it doesn't heal the wounds, I said, my voice steady. What I truly needed was to confront the hurt and find a way to move forward, not just for me, but for my marriage. The segment aired, and the reaction was largely positive. Many viewers resonated with the idea of taking ownership of one's feelings, and I received a flood of supportive messages from people who appreciated my honesty. It felt good to be on the path toward healing, and I was beginning to see a glimmer of hope for my relationship with Sarah. As we navigated this new phase, I encouraged Sarah to reflect on her decisions, too. I suggested we attend couples therapy, a place where we could safely explore our feelings and work on rebuilding our trust. At first, she hesitated, afraid to face the gravity of what she had done. But I assured her that it was a necessary step, one that could help us both understand ourselves and each other. To my surprise, she agreed. Our first therapy session was both daunting and enlightening. We sat across from the therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Bowers, who guided our conversation. I spoke about my feelings of betrayal, the emotional fallout of her affair, and the sense of loss that had consumed me. Sarah, in turn, expressed her regrets and the struggles she faced in our marriage that had led her to seek fulfillment outside of it. I didn't think it would go that far, she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. I wanted to feel alive, to escape the routine. But I never meant to hurt you, Jake. I see that now. It was a painful revelation, but it felt like a step forward, sharing our truths, no matter how raw they were, allowed us to connect in a way we hadn't in a long time. Dr. Bowers helped us understand that it was essential to create a safe space where we could both express our needs and feelings without fear of judgment. As the sessions progressed, we worked on rebuilding communication. I learned to voice my feelings without hostility, and Sarah began to open up about her insecurities and fears. She shared how she felt neglected in our marriage and how the pressures of life had begun to wear her down. It hadn't excused her actions, but understanding her perspective helped me see the complexity of our situation. Over time, I began to notice changes in Sarah. She became more engaged, more present in our conversations. There was a sincerity in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, and I felt a flicker of the intimacy we once shared. For the first time since the affair was revealed, I felt hopeful. However, I also recognized that healing wouldn't be linear. It came with its own set of challenges. There were days when the weight of betrayal would creep back in, and I'd find myself questioning everything. But we were learning to navigate those moments together, to acknowledge the pain without letting it consume us. Through our therapy sessions, I also came to terms with my own actions. I realized that my quest for revenge had not only been a way to shield myself from pain, but also a distraction from addressing the deeper issues in my marriage. I had let anger take control, and while it felt empowering at first, it ultimately led me down a path of destruction. One evening, after a particularly productive therapy session, Sarah and I decided to take a walk through the city. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the streets, and for the first time in a long while we felt at ease in each other's company. As we walked, I reached for her hand and she took it without hesitation. "I'm proud of us," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I didn't think we could get here after everything." She smiled softly and there was a vulnerability in her expression. "I didn't either, but I want to work on this with you. I want to be better for us." In that moment, I felt a wave of warmth wash over me, the kind that reminded me of the love we had once shared. I knew we had a long way to go, but for the first time in a while, I felt we were on the right path. We were both willing to confront our mistakes, learn from them, and grow together. As we continued our walk, I couldn't help but think about Chef Max and the impact of my earlier actions. While I still felt justified in my critiques, I also understood that I had to let go of the anger that had fueled my actions. It was time to focus on what truly mattered, restoring my marriage and nurturing the love we had fought so hard to reclaim. The culinary world no longer felt like my battlefield. Instead, it had become a lesson in forgiveness and growth. I knew I could speak out against injustice, but I also recognized that genuine healing required compassion, not just for others but for myself, too. As we strolled through the city hand in hand, I realized that I had emerged from the darkness of betrayal into a new light of understanding. It was about revenge anymore. It was about redemption, healing, and forging a deeper connection with the woman I had once loved so fiercely. I was ready to embrace this new chapter of our lives, and together, we would find a way to move forward. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah and I continued to navigate the complexities of rebuilding our relationship. Our therapy sessions became a cornerstone of our healing process. We talked openly about our fears, our desires, and the things that had once driven a wedge between us. It was challenging, but it slowly began to foster a deeper understanding between us. Meanwhile, Chef Max's fall from grace was a cautionary tale in the culinary world. The media frenzy surrounding him had finally calmed, but the damage was done. His restaurant, once a beacon of culinary artistry, closed its doors for good. I could feel mixed emotions about it. On one hand, I had felt vindicated. My actions had a real impact on his career. Yet on the other hand, I grappled with the realization that many innocent people had suffered as well. One evening, while Sarah and I were cooking dinner together, something we hadn't done in ages, I brought up the topic. "Do you think it's fair what happened to Chef Max?" I asked, stirring the sauce as she chopped vegetables. She paused, considering my question. "I think he brought a lot of it on himself. He had a choice. But I also feel bad for the people who worked for him, the ones who lost their jobs because of his actions." "Yeah, it's a tough situation," I replied, my thoughts drifting back to the employees who had shared their stories with me. "I guess it shows how interconnected everything really is. Our choices have consequences, not just for ourselves but for others too." Sarah nodded, and we fell into a comfortable silence as we continued to cook. It was moments like this that reminded me of the love we had built together, the simple joys we had once shared. I felt grateful that we were slowly rediscovering that connection. As part of our healing process, I decided to reach out to some of the former employees of Chef Max's restaurants. I wanted to offer my apologies for the role I had played in their suffering. I realized that while my pursuit of revenge had been fueled by hurt, it had also caused collateral damage. I reached out to a few individuals, sharing my story and expressing my regret for how my actions may have affected their lives. To my surprise, many responded with understanding. They appreciated my honesty, and some even offered their support. It was a humbling experience that reminded me of the importance of accountability and empathy. As spring blossomed, Sarah and I found ourselves more connected than ever. We began to establish new routines, ones that brought joy back into our lives. We started hosting dinner parties with friends, inviting people into our home to share meals and laughter. It felt good to create new memories together, each gathering a testament to our resilience. One evening, while cleaning up after a particularly fun dinner, Sarah turned to me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I know we still have a long way to go, but I feel like we're finally starting to really heal," she said, her eyes shining with sincerity. I smiled, feeling a swell of affection for her. "Me too. I can't believe how far we've come since everything blew up. It's not perfect, but it feels real. I want us to keep working on this." And so we did. We made a pact to communicate openly, to check in with each other regularly, and to make time for those simple moments that had once brought us together. We started taking long walks, visiting local farmers markets, and even trying new recipes. The act of creating together became a metaphor for our relationship, each meal a collaboration, a blend of flavors that reflected our journey. I continued to update my blog, not just with critiques of the culinary world but also reflections on love, forgiveness, and personal growth. I shared our story, not just the heartbreak and betrayal, but also the resilience it had taken to rebuild. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and I began to receive messages from people who found comfort in our journey of healing. One evening, as I sat down to write, I found myself reflecting on the lessons I had learned. Betrayal can take many forms, but the most profound lessons come from facing our truths, taking responsibility for our actions, and finding compassion for ourselves and others. I realized that my journey had been about more than revenge. It had been about transformation. As I closed my laptop, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Sarah walked into the room and wrapped her arms around me from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice soft. I turned to face her, my heart swelling with affection. "Just how grateful I am for this second chance with you. I never thought we'd find our way back to each other, but here we are." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "I'm grateful too. I know I messed up, but I want to be the partner you deserve. I want us to keep growing together." And with that, I felt a renewed sense of hope. We had both learned that love isn't just about the good times. It's about facing the storms together, about picking up the pieces and choosing to rebuild. As we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, I knew that our love story was far from over. We had weathered the storm, learned from our mistakes, and emerged stronger on the other side. Together, we would continue to write our narrative, one filled with compassion, understanding, and a commitment to truly cherish one another. Life, much like the culinary arts, is about balance, a dance between flavors, a blend of experiences, and the courage to embrace vulnerability. And for us, that journey was just beginning.